And welcome to The Daily Objective, episode 397.
Wow.
Is this an avalanche of outstanding content being provided every day to you? Yes, it is. And Amy and I are honored to be hosting today.
Yes.
Pretty hard to follow up on Nico's yesterday. He gets into the nitty-gritty of philosophy. We're going to talk a little more on the cultural level. Going through the news the other day, why would I read the news? But I did. And as many of you know, a new version of West Side Story has been produced. The stage play that was made into a film in 1961, starring Natalie Wood and a whole bunch of white people. I only exaggerate a little bit, but it was a surprisingly white cast for a film in which the plot, if you don't know West Side Story, it's a gang film and a romance, loosely based on Romeo and Juliet, but instead of being rivaling families, it's rivaling street gangs, Jets and the Sharks. Well, why would they be called Sharks? Well, because they come from overseas. They come from Puerto Rico. Or as Yaron says, Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
We've talked about that before. Apparently, everybody in Puerto Rico now says Puerto Rico. I still say Puerto Rico.
Yes.
In any event, West Side Story, 1957 musical, 1961 film, a great film, which I'm not going to speak on as an expert because I haven't seen it since I was younger. But, and this is the interesting part, a new movie has been released. West Side Story has been reproduced for release in 2021 by the man. Who's the best director in the whole world? Everybody out there's like Kubrick. No, Steven Spielberg has produced and released West Side Story in 2021.
Is there an alien puppet involved in this one?
No aliens. No Close Encounters of the Third Kind. No Indiana Jones. No, this is Spielberg taking West Side Story and bringing it up to date. Well, that could be a good idea, right? We get a lot of reboots and re-releases and remakes.
Sure, why not?
It can be a good, except what happens when you take a story about street gangs on the west side of New York City, and the street gangs are aligned around race and ethnicity. You've got the Sharks from Puerto Rico, and you've got the Jets, who are just a bunch of white hoods. And it's fun because it's so rich with culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit stereotypy, but it's a 2-hour film or a 2-hour play. You're going to play on stereotypes. You can be only so nuanced. And the music, Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim, who unfortunately just passed away in November on the 26th, created this amazing music. I feel pretty, oh so pretty, and I want to live in America. And just classic
catchy
music.
Very catchy.
In a play about gang fights and gang members.
Get the knife out.
And Romeo and Juliet tragedy.
Yeah.
They don't both die. I should probably not give spoilers if you haven't yet seen West Side Story as either a play or a film, but Jets, Sharks, white guys, Puerto Ricans, and it's 2021. What are you going to do with that if you're Steven Spielberg? Of course, you're going to try to make it all right, all better, all up to date. So, for example, one of the only Puerto Rican actresses in the original stage play was Rita Moreno, who is amazing. That role of Maria was played by Natalie Wood in the film. So it's 2021. What's Steven Spielberg going to do? He's going to hire a bunch of authentic Puerto Rican actors and actresses. I don't even think you're allowed to say actresses anymore, female actors or actors. Heaven forbid that we apply gender norms to that.
They say actress, best supporting actress.
Some people still do.
At the Oscars.
That's true.
Those bigots.
I tell you, what's up with that? So Steven Spielberg's going to get more authentic and less, more inclusive, less divisive. So the very first story I read when I went to see, what's up with this new movie? Maybe it'll be worth seeing. Maybe it'll be a good thing. It's Steven Spielberg. How bad can it be? The first article I saw was on The Cut, which is one of the NY mag sites, by Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez.
I wonder if she's Irish.
Well, she's Puerto Rican, so
Oh.
she might not even be a she. Andrea being also a man's name. And this essay opens thusly. Link is in the show notes that I posted on Facebook already. My first exposure to West Side Story left the taste of ashes in my mouth. I was 22 and had recently become one of the thousands of young people leaving Puerto Rico as part of the island's brain drain before its debt crisis became fully known. My Australian grad school advisor casually mentioned that my reporting about my home had made her think of the song America. After our meeting, I dutifully looked up a clip from the 1961 film adapted from the musical, curious about what she meant. That afternoon in the school newsroom, where I was the only Puerto Rican, I encountered Rita Moreno, the only Boricua, that's a word for Puerto Rican, in the film, drenched in paint to make her skin look browner. Puerto Rico, my heart's devotion, she spits out with a fake smile before revealing her scorn. Let it sink back in the ocean. Now, I'll end the quote from the story there. First of all,
dramatic.
You have to understand.
Who are these people?
If you're going to understand West Side Story, again, you've got a gang of Puerto Rican immigrants and a community of Puerto Ricans in New York City living on the West Side. And Rita Maria is singing about how magnificent it is to come to America, how much better it is, why her family comes to America, why everybody should come to America for the opportunities and the freedom. And our friend here, Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez, is saying, oh, that's so terrible. But Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez came to America to as part of the brain drain. Puerto Rico was losing all of its best brains, similar to what happened in England when they realized that the United States was a freer country with more opportunity. And before the debt crisis, before the economy of Puerto Rico went to hell, the writer is saying there were good and compelling reasons to come to America. Maria in the play, in the film, is singing, there are good and compelling reasons to come to America. Now, it's a musical, it's exaggerated, it's exuberant, it's outrageous, and she's really digging into Puerto Rico. But what he also doesn't mention is that during this song, and especially in the movie version, which was a little, they updated the lyrics a bit over the play, her friend Anita is singing back to her, well, sure, if you're white in America. And with each line that Maria sings to celebrate, I want to live in America, Anita comes back with a dig against America. But that is conveniently left out, or at least it doesn't seem enough to provide the balance that Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez is looking for. Later in the, he writes,
I wonder what she would like to have. What would she ask Santa for?
Later in the story, Andrea writes, the 1961 film adaptation, full of brown face, inaccurate accents, and offensive remarks, exported these stereotypes beyond New York for Americans. Now listen to this and tell me if this applies to you. Those of you who have seen the film are old enough to have seen the film, and especially if you haven't seen the film, does this apply to you? For Americans and for the rest of the world, West Side Story was, and 60 years later remains, the dominant image of what Puerto Ricans are.
I didn't even actually know that it was about Puerto Ricans. Honestly, didn't. I'm like, I guess there are Hispanics in this film, and that's great. Fine. It's wonderful.
Latinx or Latinxes.
Yeah.
I still don't know how to pronounce that. Anybody who knows how to pronounce this neologism, this new word, Latin with the letter X at the end? Latinx.
I'm just going to. Okay.
Latinx. I always pronounce it Latinx, which is probably wrong and probably offensive. And that will get me canceled at some point here.
Help me out, people. What do you want for Christmas? Huh?
So the writer goes on, Spielberg and screenwriter Tony Kushner were aware of these deep flaws as they went into creating the 2021 remake. At a technical level, it's easy to see why critics have lauded the film. It's gorgeous to look at, from its cinematography to its costumes. The updated choreography is electrifying, as is the decision to set the story with slum clearance as the backdrop. The characters feel more fully developed, and most of the actors shine in their roles, like Marina Ariana DeBose carries the film in her powerful, heartbreaking turn as Anita. The portrayal of the Sharks received a major update, thanks to a small army. A small art, boy, is that the right word in the culture war? The portrayal of the Sharks received a major update thanks to a small army of Puerto Rican consultants, historians, and cast members who provided their expertise to the filmmakers.
Did they have knives?
See, there you go, playing on the old stereotype. All 30 of the Sharks are Latinx or Latinx, with 20 being Boricua, actual Puerto Ricans, not just Latin Americans. I think that's the reason why they don't want, why they put an X there, is they don't want to say Latin Americans.
Yeah.
That makes it sound like the American part matters.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Get that out of there. Okay, later in the article, to wrap this bit up, yet to me, most of these details felt like cosmetic changes to right the previous version's sins, and in many ways, the bare minimum the filmmakers could do. The bare minimum the filmmakers can do. Steven Spielberg, one of the great directors, whatever you think of his films, most of them are outstanding. A few of them, like Artificial Intelligence, make me queasy, but like Kubrick could produce films that you're like, what the hell are you doing? You're better than this. So anyway, Steven Spielberg and the studios spent $100 million making this movie.
I just got to stop.
Yet to me, most of these details felt like cosmetic changes to right the previous version's sins, and in many ways, the bare minimum the filmmakers could do. The bare minimum the filmmakers can do. All 30 of the Sharks are Latin tinks, with 20 being Boricua. Received a major update thanks to a small army of Puerto Rican consultants, historians, and cast members. The bare minimum that Steven Spielberg could do. Okay, how do you get that? How do you create this new version of the film? We'll get into the reviews and how it's actually performed financially. But how do you do this? You create this $100 million film with all these great Latin American or Latinx actors, these great updates, all of these things to satisfy our 2021 understanding of race and ethnicity. Well, why is the writer still not satisfied? Back to the article. For the most part, the film struggles to engage with the elephant in the room. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, and most of what the Sharks experience is directly linked to imperialism, on top of your classic American racism and anti-immigrant sentiment.
I feel such guilt with all of this.
Are you starting to feel the guilt? Is it starting to come? I'll tell you what, if you feel guilt, if you want to assuage your guilt, what you need is an act of self-sacrifice. That act of self-sacrifice can be to contribute to our super chat. We have Tazy's already come in, or excuse me, Mary Aline came in with the first super chat at $2.
Thank you so much,
because she's
Mary.
assuaging her ethnic guilt. And Tazy as well is in with $4.49 in British pounds. The British have more to atone for when it comes to colonialism than anybody. And I'm kidding, of course. I know you're only contributing and putting in the super chat because it's fun and it supports the Ayn Rand Institute, and that's what you should be doing.
The Ayn Rand Center UK.
Excuse me. Thank you for catching that. I was about to give the web address. I wonder if I would have given the wrong one for that too. The Ayn Rand Center UK receives these donations. It keeps the operations running, gives you the daily objective 5 days a week, all of the other amazing shows, all of the other amazing hosts who don't always stumble over their words the way some of us do. Do that with the super chat. But also, if you're not a member yet, member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, go to aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership, or just aynrandcenter.co.uk. The member link is right there, and sign up. Be like us. Don't you want to be like the cool kids? Yes, you do.
Yes.
You should be a member. And Tazy says, in its original inception, it was supposed to be a Catholic gang versus Jews, but they changed it because they thought it was too controversial. It is interesting too that all the writers, including on the music side, were all Jewish.
I would really want Mel Brooks to direct that one.
But Mel Brooks would have to direct it, and total comedy, over the top stereotypes.
Yeah, and if you really want to assuage your guilt, you can always apologize to our most famous Puerto Rican.
Who's our most famous Puerto Rican?
That happens to be Yaron Brook.
Yaron Brook. That's right. If you support Yaron Brook, you're assuaging your Puerto Rican guilt, because he's now a Puerto Rican. He lives on Puerto Rico, as they say, and he's also Jewish. You can't get better than that.
Oh yeah, right. I know. It's just hitting two guilt stone, or with two birds with guilt stones. I guess two guilt stones.
Guilt stones.
Guilt stones.
Guilt stones.
It's what you hold. It's heavy in your heart. It's the stone that's really heavy.
I've never had guilt stones. You get kidney stones, gallstones, guilt stones. Yeah, equally painful if you fall for it.
Right.
All right, real quick, back to the article. Spielberg and Kushner have insisted this remake was necessary because its themes of racism, xenophobia, poverty, and violence remain as urgent as they were before, if not more. What they seem to miss is, as critic Karina Del Val-Shorsky wrote, there's a combination of Latin and Jewish sounding, quote, these continuous revivals reinforce America's colonizing power to determine who Puerto Ricans get to be, unquote. And back to the article. That's mostly because no matter how much authenticity you try to bring to West Side Story, the story requires that Puerto Ricans ultimately be the antagonists. The Sharks never have a chance to be somewhat humanized in the way that the G Officer Krupke sequence does for the Jets. Okay, you've got a story where the Puerto Ricans are the bad guys. In any story, somebody's going to be the bad guy. Would this only have been legitimate if a bunch of straight white males, ideally homophobes, were the bad? I mean, this is the story. And it makes sense the way the story is written, that the immigrants ultimately are seen as the victims, not the antagonists. Mm-hmm. Anyway, in this version, the white triumphs over brown. Coding remains coding. Remember, everything is a code. Everything is code words. Everything is a dog whistle. You've coded that belief into the film, prioritizing fidelity to the story over nuance. Prioritizing, in other words, this is the story I'm telling. Oh, well, shouldn't it be nuanced in a way to bring in a more woke perspective? All right, let me wrap up the article. Last paragraph, real quick. Ultimately, I want more than the broken English, hypersexualized, otherized crumbs we've been given for decades.
Dear Santa, I would like to have
more than the broken English, hypersexualized, otherized crumbs we've been given for decades.
Does Santa need to be Puerto Rican, though? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, in the lyrics, Anita wanted Maria to, quote, forget that boy and find another, unquote. I just want us to move on, leaving West Side Story in the past where it belongs. The neat thing, the great thing about this is that Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez can have their wish. I say there in that non-gendered way, because again, we haven't established whether Andrea is a gentleman or a lady. These days, it could be none of the above or even all of the above, but Andrea can get their wish in exactly the manner that Andrea asks. I just want us to move on, leaving West Side Story in the past where it belongs. The way that you do that, this is great. The way that you do that is when you see the marquee on the movie theater, you see West Side Story, this 2021 version. You're walking down the street, the marquee is up there. Here's what you do. You walk by and you don't buy a ticket and you just keep going, and it leaves West Side Story in the past for you, which points to the answer. You know, it's 2021, and this idea that we need to be concerned about the race of the actors and the actresses and the people involved and the way in which the production is put together. Has this person not seen Hamilton?
Right.
Oh, we've got to get the race right. We need Latinx actors because it's a play about Latin Americans. Well, somebody needs to tell Lin-Manuel that, because I don't think he got Hamilton right. And yet it was a brilliant twist on Hamilton, made it great fun.
Mhm.
And nobody had a problem with that because, of course, the people who were featured were not the people in power.
The same with if I'm saying this right, Bridgerton. It's I believe yeah,
Bridgerton.
Bridgerton. Yes. Yeah, same thing. Multi-race casting, but
Yes.
you know,
Man, I didn't know there were that
everything's-
many people of color in Victorian
So,
England.
you know, the implication with Hamilton and Bridgerton is that no matter what your background, you can, as an actor, you know, if whatever ethnicity or race or however you're a human being primarily, and you can bring empathy and passion and that kind of energy to whatever role you're playing, whether that is the role of a white person in England. You can still bring your own energy to that as a human being. And the implication is that your ethnicity and your race and all and your gender, even just in certain ways, just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because we're all human beings and we're all capable of reason. And more so than that, you could kind of stretch it out a little bit into the better ideas, which is that reason is an attribute of the individual, that we're all individuals, that we're not all pre-programmed because of our background. It's we're not nurture robots.
That's right. In fact, there's a link to Ayn Rand's references to racism in the show notes. Worth reading if you don't. Of course you do, but anybody who doesn't, anybody who stumbles across this video and is ready to cancel me, take a look at that perspective on individualism and how people are to be judged. But I will take it a step further. Because of Hamilton, and Hamilton's not new. Back in the late 70s, we had The Wiz. Many of you will know that from Broadway, but it was also a film starring Diana Ross.
Mm-hmm.
Great fun. Took the Wizard of Oz 40 years later and said, oh, let's have African-American, let's have Black actors star in the film. Oh, what a great idea. And we'll update the music. We'll make it a little more funky, a little more appropriate to today. And they did. And it was so successful that, again, it went from being in the movies to being on Broadway. Great fun. Did anybody say, well, wait, the Wizard of Oz, they're down in Kansas and they weren't Black? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not just that it doesn't matter either, because it goes beyond that. It's optional. You can and you should. Fantasia reminds me, Michael Jackson was also in The Wiz. You not only can, but you should extract value out of these things.
Mm-hmm.
You should find the fun in this.
Yes.
Racism, bigotry, irrational prejudices should be left in the trash bin of history.
Yeah.
But this idea that Andreas has this is not the way. This is not the way that has happened, and it's not the way that it's going to happen.
Yep.
Does race matter or doesn't it? Does ethnicity matter or doesn't it?
Only in the sense that you can celebrate it and extract value from it, whoever you are.
Exactly right.
Whoever you are.
Exactly right.
So St. Patrick's Day, African Americans can I know there are African Americans who celebrate St. Patrick's Day. I mean, what's that?
Well, there are non-Irish white people who celebrate St. Patrick's.
Yes.
It's
Germans who celebrate St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. The tropes around ethnic groups, the stereotypes, the cliches, the tropes, the ways in which we tell these stories, these exist for reasons.
Yeah.
The gender tropes, the ethnicity tropes, the race trope, because being a man or being a woman or being of a particular race or a certain culture or a certain ethnicity is hard and interesting and ultimately great fun.
Yeah.
Growing up isn't easy. It's why there were street gangs. Establishing your identity as a man, figuring out who you are. And if you know West Side Story, for example, our hero, Tony, is a member of the gang. They changed this in the Spielberg one, but go back to the play and to 1961's film. Our hero, Tony, is out of the gang. He's a year out of the gang. He's grown up. He's gone off, done other things, comes back to town as a former member of the Jets. The whole song, once you're a Jet, you're always a Jet. He's trying to grow up. He's trying to figure out what it is to be a man. And a lot of these guys, kind of a side journey in that journey of becoming a man was joining a gang, finding your own inner strength, your own toughness, your own identity, your own kindred spirits. Now, we can look at that and say, well, gangs, that's the wrong way to do that. And it was. But the film knows that that is something a lot of us did, a lot of us went through. It ain't easy to be a man. It ain't easy to be a woman. And you have the Anita and Maria and Anybody's. There's a character named Anybody's. The implication is she's anybody's girl. She's the tomboy. She wants to actually join the gang. Join a gang, see the world. Well, that was one of her old song lyrics. It ain't easy being a woman and being a member of a race. It ain't easy being Black in America. Depending on where you live, most of it you can shrug off. In some places where you live, you can't shrug it off at all. And people will give you those sideways glances and less trust and more trouble. It ain't easy being part of a culture. It ain't easy being part of a certain ethnicity. These things are challenging, and therefore they make for interesting stories that can be told in ways that let us all grow through being a man, being a woman, being in a minority, being in the majority, being in a particular identity.
Yeah.
Growing up ain't easy. Being an adult isn't easy. And here's the thing, getting it right isn't easy. And that story needs to be told, and it is told, and that is the richness of so many of our stories.
But getting it right, it can only be done on an individual level. You can't magically think somehow, some kind of healing for the collective, for the tribe, for the race, for the whatever, and for the gender. You can't magically wish that, and you cannot ascribe collective guilt to other groups that you consider to be groups. Well, you need to drop all of that. What's her name again?
Andrea Gonzalez Ramirez.
Release yourself from all of that and live your life and see people as individuals first, not what their identity is or what they claim to be their identity or whatever. Every one of us as a human being has commonalities that we can talk about. And it's not hard.
Yes.
It isn't difficult. Yeah.
So what kind of restaurant do you want to go to?
I'd like to go to Puerto Rican one.
I'm sure there's seafood restaurants and steakhouses and burger joints, but as often as not, it's Mexican or Chinese food or Hungarian or Middle Eastern
or Vietnamese.
If I say, let's go to a Japanese steakhouse, that's great. Not a cause for indignation. That's a cause for celebration. Right. In other words, you know what I mean? That means something. It might not mean much. Ethnicity might not mean much. Culture might not mean much, but it means something. And sure, it's light and it's inexact and it's whimsical even.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's stereotypical and prejudiced. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say, respect my culture, but then also don't appropriate, stay in your lane, know your privilege. How dare you judge me? I can't respect something if I'm not allowed to identify it. I'm not allowed to judge it. It's always been a matter of wanting it both ways. And you can't have that. In a post-race, post-ethnicity, post-gender world, we will, as Amy suggested, we will enjoy and celebrate differences. And instead of feeling guilt over developments and failings of the past, we will celebrate being so far beyond slavery and racism and sexism. And we will say with full philosophic certainty, we never had to take any of it seriously, did we?
Yeah. And at this point, I really think the bottom line for our friend here in the article, and for people who are confused by their wokeness or other people's wokeness, the thing that you need to to overcome, because it is an obstacle, is what the woke crowd call, and they have this particular phrase they use called standpoint epistemology.
Standpoint epistemology
Basically means that you yourself having an identity of being white or have an identity of being Black or Hispanic or however, cannot, especially if you're white, you cannot empathize or understand or imagine the troubles of other groups.
Because you're stuck in your epistemology, your way of thinking.
In your group. And so it's that whole deterministic garbage that you need to overcome, you need to reject, and you need to empower yourself and say, I am capable of empathizing with people who are different from me, who have different backgrounds, who have different cultures, who have different looks. You can do it.
Pablo points out in the chat, never heard of standpoint epistemology, and that's okay because that's just the latest version. Have you heard of philosopher kings? Mm-hmm. Going back to Plato and these people who engage with these ideas on such a level that the hoi polloi will never understand. Yeah. They can't understand that. They don't think at that level. They don't think in that way, and that's the key. They can't think their way out of the cave. They can't see more than the shadows. If that sounds like you're going back too far, jump forward to our friend Karl Marx and his identification of proletarian logic versus bourgeoisie logic. The logic of the philosophers was to understand the dialectic. It was the philosophers who understood that for every ordinary idea and for every revolutionary idea, the better minds would synthesize the two. If that sounds too far back, go forward another 50 years to Aryan logic and the superior German mind. You always hate to bring Hitler into a conversation. I played the Hitler card, but the Aryan logic was superior. This is a different way of thinking, a different epistemology. And now in 2021, with the advantage of hindsight, all of the technological progress, all of the miracles that have grown out of Aristotelian logic, one logic that applies to everybody of every race, every ethnicity, every gender. These idiots say, well, you think differently depending on what you've been through. So we need standpoint epistemology. We need stakeholder epistemology. We need utilitarian and egalitarian epistemology. And that to me is the ultimate source of all of this. Is egalitarianism. And
what kind of misery does that bring to everybody?
So long as you look at the world and say, in the aggregate, there's the key, in the aggregate, in the collective, as a group, Black people don't make as much money as white people. Women don't have as many opportunities as men. Puerto Ricans get more movie depictions showing them negatively than positively. So long as you don't look at that girl over there, and that Black guy over there, and that Puerto Rican friend over here, you're never going to get it right. So what do you do? What's the answer? Because I want to give the answer. I want to put out the positive here. Mm-hmm. And the answer is read Atlas Shrugged. But a little more specifically, number one, what do you do? Number one, out of the three things I'm going to tell you, write these down. You won't have to. They're in the show notes. Number one, what I want all and each and every one of you to do is absolutely nothing. Because the problems are already going away of their own accord. I usually hate pithy neologisms, new phrases, especially anything that comes from the right. But one true thing that they've identified is go woke, go broke. Steven Spielberg, I mentioned this on purpose, spent $100 million on this movie. And apparently it's a beautiful movie, beautifully constructed, the technology, the sets, the cinematography, some updates to the music, beautifully recorded. And it's made $10 million back. Oh. I think it might be up to $12 million after the weekend. And, there's going to be more worldwide distribution. There's going to be digital distribution. There will be DVDs. Some people still buy DVDs. And so there will be some more money commit. There's no way he's going to make back $1 million on this. And it's brilliant. And it's fun. Ann in the chat mentioned something I thought about mentioning. Spielberg said about subtitles. There are sections that are the dialogue is in Spanish, and he didn't put subtitles on the screen. So Anne points out, Spielberg said about subtitles, if I subtitled the Spanish, I'd simply be doubling down on the English and giving English power over the Spanish. Now, there will undoubtedly be, and I'm sure there already is, a Spanish language distribution of this film. Will they subtitle the English parts? Or would that be discrimination too? There will be a French version of this film dubbed in French. Will they subtitle everything? Or do they leave out subtitling the Spanish? Or maybe it would be less racist to leave out subtitling the English parts and let the French just figure it out.
Yeah, and for all those people who are hearing impaired, too bad.
So my number one advice to you and my number one advice to Steven Spielberg is do nothing. The problems are going away. They are taking care of themselves of their own accord. It takes a little more than that. So my number two is be rational. Be rational about this stuff. We did a whole episode on blind followers and blind rebels. Do not be a blind follower of this new awakening, of this wokening. And do not be a blind rebel against it either, because there is racism, there is sexism, there is anti-ethnicity, there is discrimination, there is prejudice. Don't be that either. Just be rational. And my number 3 bit of advice for you is be reasonable. In other words, what's the difference between being rational and being reasonable? Don't be a douche canoe. I know, technical philosophical term. Don't be a jerk. You're going to run into people who have been harmed by racism. You're going to run into people who have been harmed by discrimination in ways that were irrational. And, the answer is, well, you applied for that job. The guy said, I don't like Puerto Ricans. Go get a different job. Sure. But, understand why that guy would be mad, why he would say, oh, that was really irrational of that person to do that. That was not good. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
You do not have to dive full bore into anti-racism, which is not anti-racism. You do not need to become part of the white fragility movement to say, racism sucks. It's out there. Most of the time, we don't have to deal with it. In fact, a lot of the time, people of color or other minorities don't have to deal with it, but it's out there. It happens. When it happens, show your disdain, fight against it when you have the opportunity, or don't patronize businesses of racists or other irrational people. They just do the right thing. And back to number 1, these problems will, and they are going away of their own accord. The answer is be rational, be reasonable.
Yes. And just keep promoting the perspective, powerful perspective of individualism and reason. And that and people can empower themselves to understand other people, and what my one don't is don't try to solve the world's problems by trying to instill collective guilt on anyone. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It just makes you look foolish.
It doesn't work against you, and it ain't going to work against them. Just live your damn life. Be good, be reasonable, set the example, fight evil when you come across it, including fighting the woke warriors. But the woke warriors is the fringe. That does not equate to the entire left. Right. Just like the reactionaries and the blind rebellers does not equate to the entire right. No, most of us are reasonable. Most of us are just living our lives, doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And as a side effect, saving the world. So thank you for joining on this. Thank you to the ARCUK folks for inviting us to host the Daily Objective today. We hope you've enjoyed it, gotten something out of it, and found one more reason to go to AynRandCenter.co.uk and become a member if you're not already, and throw in some more super chats next time around to support the Institute. Thank you to those of you who did. And
thank you, guys.
Again, to Mary, I've almost missed Mary Aline's second contribution, had a comment. The article sounds like tribal desperation. Does the author have a self beyond tribal outrage? Seems phony or something. Well, I can see that. And I linked to the article on my Facebook wall. You could take a look, see if you think it runs a little deeper than that. I think it does, but I think that this person is carrying a boulder, not a chip, but a boulder on their shoulder. and doesn't need to. They need to drop that. The old wisdom of when you go to the master walking through the woods and and master says, there's a boulder over there. Do you think the boulder is heavy? And the followers say, yes, master, the boulder is heavy. And the master answers, not if you choose not to carry it. And that's what Andrea needs to do, is choose not to carry that boulder.
Right.
Let it go. The outrages of the past, some of them weren't even that outrageous, but the ones that are in the past. We need to go forward with better ideas and not carry the boulder of the past.
Right.
Live your life. Live it well. Live it honestly, justly, fairly. Be good to any good people that you know, whether they be Puerto Rican or Chinese, because I'm in the mood for Chinese food, or of any particular, and celebrate those ethnicities. Enjoy them. They should never have been cause for condemnation in and of themselves, but they should and will continue to remain causes for celebration. Meantime, live your life.
Live it.
Live it.
Treat yourself.
And thanks again for joining us.